Hey everybody, this is Brett Ingram, and this is the optYOUmize podcast, the show that helps entrepreneurs build their dream business and dream life. Today we're talking with Andrew Matthews, author and international speaker with over 8 million book sales, 5,000 media interviews. He's spoken to over 1,000 audiences in 30 countries about the power of gratitude and being happy. I'm super excited about this because I'm a big believer personally in the impact happiness and gratitude can have on our lives. So, with that, welcome, Andrew, and thanks a lot for joining us.
Brett, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, likewise. I had a chance to go through your books and, I'm super excited. I got a lot of things I want to ask you, but let's start off a little bit with your background. I'm just curious. So, at the start of your career professionally, what were you doing there? And then we'll talk more about what you're currently into now.
Yeah, Brett, my first love was always drawing and painting, but I thought I should become a lawyer first. So I began law studies and then decided I would pursue what I really loved, which was painting portraits, learning classical drawing. I also was a cartoonist. And even though I was doing what I loved as a profession in my mid-20s, I realized that a lot of my friends were happier than me. It was a shocking discovery to suddenly realize that it was people who had maybe come through cancer, or people who had gone broke, or people that had lost loved ones way too soon, seemed to
Mhm.
be people that were dealing with life better than I was, and they had a better attitude than I did. And there came a time, age 25, when realized that I had no excuse. I began to read books about happiness and attitude, and uh, so many things dawned on me that as I look back, I wonder how I got to the age of 25 and didn't know those things. But it was as a result of uh, coming to understand some basic things about taking responsibility, that no one else can make us happy, stop complaining, quit blaming your mother, focus on what you have, all of those things. I thought, if it took me 25 years to figure this out, maybe there's other people out there. And I think for those of us that have written self-help books or any kind of non-fiction book, very often we write the book that we wished we'd had.
Mhm.
So I sat down and wrote a book called Being Happy. It was the book for people who hate self-help books, but it was going to be full of cartoons because I wanted it to be entertaining and I wanted it to be simple. And so I sent it off to publishers and no one wanted it. But after 17 rejections of that book, that was my second book. The first one uh, only had like 61 rejections. Um, Being Happy um, began to get traction, firstly in Southeast Asia and latterly then Australia, New Zealand, UK, USA, and so on, and now in 48 languages.
Amazing. That is amazing. I have to touch on something that you said. So it's funny that you mentioned you found people that, despite the fact, they were happy when you actually sort of pulled back the curtain a little bit, you realize, they were people that went through tremendous struggle. Well, I was working in a corporate environment in my late 20s, and I was in the New York office for a company located in California. So I went out to the office out there, spend a few days with all the rest of my colleagues that I didn't get to see very often. And I remember being in a couple of the meetings, and there was this one woman in particular. She was about my age, and she was just had that level of happiness that's almost to a point that it's annoying. She was so happy all the time. And I thought to myself, I'm grumbling under my breath, like, oh, are you come to find out she had already had cancer twice, had it again, was married with an infant son at home. And it shamed me when I thought about here she is happy to be on the planet every other day that she's got, not knowing which day might be her last. And I'm grumbling because she's too happy. And I felt so terrible about that. But I also recognized that, there's some real power in that in terms of, you can't control all the time what circumstances you're in, but you have to be able to control the way that you react to it and what you can control and have impact over. So I think that that's amazing. The other thing that you said that really, hits a nerve with me is you said, we write the book that we wish we had. That's the reason I started my podcast. I was an entrepreneur for 17 years doing digital marketing, and it's a pretty solitary, deal. And I went through a lot of struggles and a lot of loneliness, things that people don't recognize because even if financially you're doing well, it doesn't necessarily mean that everything else is great. And I was, made a lot of mistakes. And I realized after the fact, geez, if I had known these things sooner, if I had invested more in relationships and all of these kinds of things. And so I set out to be the mentor I never had. It's the reason I started it. So I think those are two really fascinating things. So that obviously explains what led you to doing what you're doing now. So I just want to get the elephant out of the room for anybody out there that's like, well, this gratitude happen. This is touchy feely stuff. What exactly do you mean by gratitude and happiness, and why does that matter?
Well, firstly, thank you for sharing both those stories. That's powerful, and what a beautiful encapsulation that this colleague of yours that was going through so much and was so irritating was teaching you the kind of lesson that I was learning from similar people in Australia. Let me just say, in case you can hear this thunderstorm I'm in, I'm in far north Queensland in Australia,
I can't hear it, so I think we're okay.
and it's belting down. So the first thing is that happiness is our foundation. For those of us who say, and a lot of our listeners today, you guys are entrepreneurs, and we can sometimes think, well, uh, I'm going to get successful first, and after I'm successful, then I'll worry about being happy. And happiness is not some optional extra. Happiness is our foundation. When we're happy, we have more energy. When we're happier, we're healthier. When we're happier, we notice opportunities. When we're happier, we're more optimistic. We attract people. When we're happier, we actually solve problems faster, like 20% faster. It's been documented that happy doctors diagnose illnesses 30% more accurately. I mean, it's all stacked on the side of happiness. So the idea or the myth, if you like, that I'll get successful and then I'll be happy. No, uh, you focus on living every day as joyfully as you can, and magic happens. So, that's my first thought on, and you said something else, but where did you want to go from there?
So for me, I just obviously we've defined it what its
Oh,
importance.
gratitude.
It,
Sorry. Yes, you said
yeah,
yes. What's the well, the good thing about gratitude is you can't be grateful and angry at the same time. Try it. You can't be grateful and resentful at the same time. So when people say to me, so what's the difference between happy and unhappy people? And the core difference is happy people focus on what they have, and unhappy people focus on what's missing. And I've got a cartoon. Uh, my my whole life has been about drawing cartoons and creating images that underline or help my readers to remember my messages. And I've got a cartoon in my book, Bouncing Back, where there's the first panel, there's a guy with one slice of cake, and the caption is, happy people focus on what they have. He's just got one slice of cake and he's happy. And in the next frame, you've got a guy who's looking really miserable and down on himself, and he's got an entire cake minus one slice. And, doesn't that underline how so many people live? Those of us that have been to countries where people have so much less than we have, and yet they seem to find joy and they live with a sense of gratitude.
Yeah, that's brilliant. It's a brilliant illustration, and I have to say, having gone through some of your books, I think they're masterful. I love the way that you use the illustrations to make the points. I also love how they're broken down into really simple, easy to understand stories. So it's not preachy, but it's super effective because it allows you to really understand the point, and it drives it home in a way that it goes beyond just sort of the intellectual understanding to really give you that emotional connection to what you're talking about. And we're definitely going to talk more about that in a little bit too. Um, so I know a lot of people, and I hate to say it, but I used to be one of them that even logically understand the idea of gratitude. I understand logically, and I saw these things in the studies and all the other ideas about gratitude and why it's so important. And I honestly wanted to be that way, but for some reason, I felt like if I wasn't consciously focused on trying to do it, I would default to sort of unhappiness. And I know that there's definitely a lot of other people that are in the same boat. Do you know why that is?
I think depending on the people that we grow up around, we tend to model unconsciously, we tend to model the people that are around us. There's a few things in there. Number one, fundamental, Brett, is whether we actually like ourselves. People say to you, do you need to love yourself? Well, you need to at least like yourself because we create the life that we feel we deserve. And if I don't like myself, I will stay in a job that I hate for maybe 20 years. I might stay with a partner that treats me badly. And I will overlook opportunities because uh, in my heart, I think, well, I don't even deserve to have a great life. I will create arguments with my friends and family and colleagues because my core belief is that I don't even deserve to be happy. And so, well, if our central belief is that we don't really deserve a good life because we think, well, I've made some stupid mistakes, or we've got to forgive ourselves for not being perfect. So that is central. And the other thing that comes to mind is that our life, uh, our quality of life, hinges on the questions that we ask ourselves. And happy people have the habit of asking themselves things like, what do I love about my girlfriend? What do I love about my job? What do I love about working here? What's good about working on a weekend? What's even good about being stuck in traffic? Well, I can listen to podcasts. I can plan my weekend. It's better than walking. Um, so uh, as we begin to ask ourselves the kinds of questions where we anticipate finding positive answers, then we automatically begin to live in gratitude. And it doesn't mean that, everything is great and we don't need to be dancing around 24 hours a day and being one of those irritating Pollyanna types, maybe, but just essentially, we just our default position is we come back to that point where even when stuff goes wrong, you get bumped off a plane, you lose a key client, your secretary quits, you can still say, what's good about this? And then you're finding something. You can always find something. If someone says, well, there's nothing good about being broke. Well, there might be. You might have a spectacular story unfolding that you're going to tell your grandkids. this is where I was, and this is what I did. Or you might be in a position where finally you're going to learn about budgeting, or, learn about setting some short-term and long-term goals. Um, any, situation that you didn't want, somewhere within that situation is a benefit.
Yeah, that's it's fascinating. And when you say that, what it makes me think of is I heard the guy, I don't know if you're familiar with Damon John from Shark Tank, but I heard him in a talk one time and he said, when I was starting my clothing company, my fashion company, I didn't have a lot of money. And I looked at other people and thought, geez, if I had their budget there. But the thing that it taught me was how to be streamlined and frugal. So I learned really good habits to keep the budget tight and be very efficient with my operations. So as it started to grow, I didn't have all these other problems that a lot of people have if they have all those resources. And I 100% agree that it causes you to be resourceful when you don't have the things that maybe seem like they'd make things easier. It also tends to create more like when you're able to do something starting from a place of not having or not having the advantages, it's more valuable, it's worth more. One of the things that I recognize in behavioral patterns based on what you're saying is, I know when I talk to people, you can talk to people when you start to ask them questions, they'll say things like, well, the only thing I don't want is for this to happen. And, you know, with my luck, like this, all these things will fail. And so you start to realize, even without knowing them that well, that they're framed in such a negative way that you can imagine that they're not happy because everything that's coming out of their mouth is a complaint or a hope against the worst case scenario. And then, like you said, you'll talk to other people, and for some reason, they got 10 things going against them, and they're overjoyed because they've got this one thing that they're thinking about that, oh, this is the greatest. And it's amazing to me. And I always reveled in that because the financial realm is very easy to make examples of this because people tend to equate happiness or success with how much financial wealth that you've got. And I see people that have tons of bills, don't make a lot of money, and they're interacting with everybody around them. They're happy. They're constantly, super excited about spending time with their family and all these other things. And from the outside, it could seem like, well, how could you be? But it's all a mindset. It's amazing to me. But that is so powerful in terms of the way that you look at things. Um, so I know work and relationships are two really big areas for people that those things can either be big sources of happiness and contentment or unhappiness and feeling like unfulfilled. Are there keys to having uh, better success or happiness with your job and with your relationship?
Sure. I mean, we start with our job, and first thing we recognize is that we don't do our best because we're pleasing our boss or because we want to impress somebody. We do our best because that's the only way to enjoy your work, to feel that you're putting your heart and soul into it. Um, there was a professor at the University of Kansas, Professor Shane Lopez, and he was really interested about people who love their work. So he set out to, and these days there's lots of talk about following your passion. Lots of podcasters and go to seminars, they talk about follow your passion. So he wanted to know whether these people that really love their work are following their passion. So he did a survey of 8,500 people. Do you love your work? And there were 1,100 people that loved their work. Like, what's that, 13% or something? And so those are the people that he studied carefully. And so he said to them, how do you find a job you love? And almost without fail, their answer was, you don't find a job you love. You find a good job and you put your heart and soul into it, and you support your colleagues and you surprise your customers, and you are kind and you put joy and you put your personality into your work. And one day you discover that a good job became wonderful. And I think within that, there's a life-changing strategy for those of us who have been saying, well, maybe the next job is going to be better. No, it's with the same attitude, it's not. So, um, yeah, so that's a little sort of thought on enjoying our work. In terms of relationships, um, I tell a story in bouncing back. I play tennis with this guy called Ted, and Ted is a big mouth, and he's always making fun of people, and people are always making fun of him. I mean, why? Because, he just seems bulletproof. Like nothing worries him. I mean, he's in real estate, so it just seems like everything is a joke. And so last year, in a quiet moment, he said to me, he said, there's not a day goes by that I don't worry that I've done the wrong thing. There's not a day goes by that I don't worry that I've messed up. That he said, my life, he said, my life is a nightmare. And I mean, I thought of all the people I know, this guy, this guy that's always making fun of people and he's making fun of them. So I get an insight into what his life is like. And it was a reminder to me that everybody is going through all kinds of stuff that we don't even imagine. And if you work in an office of 20 people, some of them grew up thinking that they're ugly and are convinced of it. Some of them grew up thinking they're unlovable. Some of them grew up with their father saying, you're a loser. Some of them have parents that are dying. Some of them have kids that are ill. And we don't know any of it. And we sometimes ask ourselves the question, well, why are people so difficult? That's not the question. The question is, how do so many people even survive? It's a miracle.
Yeah.
And for me, when I'm like struggling to empathize, or I'm thinking, these people, and they can be friends, relatives, people I'm working with, people that don't return phone calls. I don't know what. I say to myself, there's stuff that these people are going through that I have no clue. And that leads me to be a little less judgmental, a little more patient, and it helps my relationships and giving people the benefit of the doubt. Yeah. So, and that's, even with our teenagers who, we think, we always think teenagers should be behaving differently. Um, and yet the stuff that is so important to them, and the things that are traumatizing them, we don't even know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely true nowadays. Geez, I think it's hard. I have a couple. Well, one is now in his early 20s, but I still have a late teen, and thankfully they've sort of navigated the landscape of what it is to grow up nowadays. But I don't minimalize the difficulty with that at all, but it is still easy for older people to look back on younger people, and it's always sort of like, "Ah, but we were the same when we were their age. Our parents were saying the same things to us, and thought, oh, we should be doing different things." So, but yeah, I think that there is so much power in that. So if we zoom out for a minute, if somebody really wants to be grateful and wants to be happy, is there a formula or steps or things that we can do to try to develop those habits in our lives if we aren't already there?
Well, I think there's three things, and we may have touched on them briefly. But first thing is that happiness is not an accident. We understand that we choose our attitude. We choose our attitude about work, or we choose our attitude toward the people in our life. And so, my own experience was that there was a day, there was, a, and it was the 19th of October, 1983. And I looked at my life and I looked at myself and I said, Andrew, you're not doing very well. You know, romance, no, not doing very well. Money in the bank, no, not so good. Exciting international travel, no. Happiness, no. And I made a decision that day that changed, I could say changed my life. It changed the trajectory of my life. And I began to notice opportunities. I began to take notice of people. I began to read books. I began to get up every day and say, today is my day to be happier, just this 24 hours. So, number one, when you are serious and you say enough, then that's when things change. Not, if everything works out, then I'll be, no, whatever is going on, it's like your colleague who'd been through cancer twice and had an infant at home and didn't know how long she was going to live. You make a
Mhm.
decision, and sometimes it's a blessing. Something comes along that causes us to say, happiness is my decision, and I will do whatever it takes. Uh, the second thing is that we refuse to get drawn into looking at what other people have, and we concentrate, we say, well, what do I have and what am I grateful for? There's a big difference between what we want and what we need. And sometimes that can be helpful. Do I have what I need? I need like a change of clothes. I need a dry bed somewhere. And I need to be able to put my heart and soul into something to feel I'm making a contribution. Uh, I don't need the latest phone. I don't need international vacations. I don't need to have the fanciest car. Have I got what I need? And then we go from there. And so we say, okay, it's making the decision. It's focusing on what we have. And then the third thing is forgiving ourselves for not being perfect. Um, one of the simple things that we can do, because we can be so hard on ourselves and say, I should have done this, I'm a loser. Um, get a, I say to people, get a picture of yourself when you were 3 years old, when you were innocent and didn't have all the answers and were just living life the best way you knew how, and put it where you can see it every day, and treat yourself as you would treat that 3-year-old child, because you still don't have all the answers and you still are just living life the best way you know how.
Yeah,
And
that's
when we
that's really
forgive,
powerful. Oh,
yeah, when we forgive ourselves, Brett, then we start to forgive other people. And suddenly there's this change in our relationships, because we're not expecting other people to be perfect, because it all stems from how we feel about ourselves.
yeah, that's such a powerful message. And I know, even in my own experience, one of the things that I see as a pattern that a lot of people have is, if they're striving for something and they feel like they're in a position of want, the attitude is always like you said before, right? Oh, I'll be happy when I get it's the same thing about the giving mentality versus the taking or asking for mentality. And people say, well, once I get to a certain level, then I'll be able to give back, and then I'll be able to invest in other people and worry about that. And they get it totally reversed. it's when you start to give without the expectation of getting anything back that all of a sudden doors open and people are like, "Oh, how can I help you with that? How can I?" And it's a remarkable paradigm shift, but I can relate to it personally because I wasn't mercenary about getting what I wanted, but I was so focused on myself and so selfish about what I needed that I couldn't. It's not that I didn't wish well for everybody else, but I just wasn't focused on that. The minute that I shifted the way that I thought and I said, what can I do to support somebody else? What can I do to reach out without asking or expecting anything in return? How can I help somebody else achieve what they want? It's remarkable that the whole it's the whole universe changes in terms of the way that people react to you, in terms of the way that opportunities present themselves. And it's fascinating and it almost seems counterintuitive. I remember when I was learning to ski. I'm not a skier, but I've only been a couple times. And one of the first lessons I learned is when I'm on the mountain, the tendency when you're nervous and you start to go down is to lean back. And from I'm not a skiing expert, but from what I understand and what I experienced, when you lean back, you have no control. You lose control, so then you fall more out of control and are when you lean forward, which seems counterintuitive and you're nervous about it, that's when you're able to control your skis. And it sort of is counterintuitive in terms of what you would do, but yet it's the right way to do it. And the giving taking thing is what I've found exactly the same. When you when you change from the scarcity mentality of I got to get what I need and what I want first, and then I'll help other people, to how can I help other people? All of a sudden, you get all the things that you need. And so I find that fascinating, but a really powerful message. And I appreciate those tips because I think they're really valuable too. So let's talk about your book, Bouncing Back. Can you share with us why you wrote it and what it's all about? First off, I have to say, having an opportunity to go through it, as I mentioned in the beginning, I love the style and the structure. It's so unique. I've read a lot and I haven't read a lot of things that are set up the way that it is. And I find all the lessons are so accessible and they're so easy to understand on a real visceral level because of the way that you lay it out, the stories that you tell, and the drawings. I love the drawings. I think they're so powerful. They encapsulate exactly what you're trying to say. So, can you tell us what it's all about and why you wrote it?
Sure. Well, firstly, we're all bouncing back from something. We're bouncing back from eating too much or spending too much or from a relationship that started out going well or from a promotion that we thought we were going to get, or maybe we're bouncing back from having lost a loved one and we're grieving. So I wanted to focus on what it is that resilient people do. And I noticed there's about 7 things that resilient people do, and we don't have to do them in any particular order, but even if we just do one of them, then life gets better. So if we talk about 3 things that resilient people do, number one is when they get into a situation that they didn't want, no matter how much they hate it, they accept it. They say, I wouldn't have chosen to be here, but this is where I am, and now I will figure out how I get to where I want to be. And there's a myth, I guess, that many people think, well, if I'm in this rotten situation, this job I hate, or this relationship that I hate, if I don't, or someone's let me down, and if I don't accept it, if I can just stay angry, then I won't be stuck with it. Mhm. And the reverse is true. That it's when you say, okay, I didn't want this, but I accept it. That's when we can actually move on. So acceptance is power. Um, so when we get that, when we understand that resilient people are flexible, happy people are flexible. So number one is acceptance. Number two is living life one day at a time. If we feel like the world is crashing down on us and how am I ever going to make it through the next year? It's like if you climb a mountain and you get stuck on a ledge, then you just focus on that ledge. You don't want to focus on, something that's a mile up the mountain. You just focus on that ledge. And so it is with living our life. We can only live 24 hours at a time. If for example, if Brett, you decided, as an example, you're going to get everything that you might want to eat in the next 5 years and everything that you might want to wear in the next 5 years, and you piled it all into a big sack and carried it around on your back. And we say, how would you get on? Well, you'd probably collapse because you're not designed to carry that kind of load. Okay, so we say, well, what if you were to get a list of everything you need to do in the next 5 years and everything that could go wrong in the next 5 years, and you carried that list around in your head? We said, well, how would that work for you? And again, you would probably collapse because you're not designed to carry that kind of load. So, there's a message there that we can only just live life in 24-hour compartments, and that works. We can do that. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing I would touch on is life gets better for us not by focusing on where we are or who we are, but who we want to be. And resilient people have a very clear picture of this is who I'm becoming. We have an image of ourselves of being confident, of being in control, of having the financial position that we want, a picture in our minds of how our career is going. Um, we become what we think about, and um, we might say, well, I'm just gonna make my life better by willpower, or I'm just going to set clear goals. That's great. But fundamental is you need a picture of yourself. You need to be able to see yourself as where you want to be and who you want to become. And without that clear picture of the new improved you, willpower is not going to do it, and a clear goal is not going to do it because eventually you just don't believe in it.
Yeah, the belief element I think is really powerful and really strong. And it's funny because the visualization dates way back, when you look at like the Olympic Games, right? You have all these athletes that are the top in the world, and what separates them is just, total like fractions of a percent of this, that, or the other thing. And I know, you know, decades and decades ago, they started to study like who were the people that keep that there were some patterns of countries or people or groups that were winning. They started to look at all that, and what they realized was, among whatever training regimens and other things they were doing, the top athletes in every sport were the ones that were tirelessly envisioning themselves standing on the podium with the gold medal being draped around their neck, like over and over and over again. And I know I watched the documentary Pumping Iron with Arnold Schwarzenegger about when he won his, I think it was his last Olympia or maybe it was his third one. And the fascinating thing to me about it was not the physicality of it. Obviously, all the guys are huge. It was the psychological warfare that he like undertook with the competitors. He was very clever. He would hang out with them. They'd have dinner before the competition, and he'd make all these little remarks that would sort of demean their confidence and cut them down, but they weren't overtly insults. It was sort of like, and you could see it was all a game. He was trying to chip away at their confidence a little bit and have their belief shrink just a little bit. And he was always, and so sometimes, understanding and really believing that you're going to be able to do it, envisioning that makes a big, big difference. Because if you can't believe it, if you can't see it in your mind's eye, it makes it that much harder to be able to achieve. So, um, I found that, sometimes what we do in life, no matter what we try, right? There's failure, there's struggle, things like that. What's the most productive way? How should we be looking at failure? Or maybe the better way to say it is when we try something and we don't get the result that we want.
Well, it's a simple thing, but I always like to tell myself every time I fail, and for me, some people say, well, there's no such thing as failure, and that's a helpful thing as well. But every time I do something that I don't get the result that I want, I say to myself, well, I'm that much closer because that's one more failure, disappointment that I've gotten through. Um, for those of us that are trying to do anything, but even entrepreneurs, for example, my understanding is that, and my experience is that most things don't work out as well as you'd hope they will. You build a website hoping people will come, and you don't get as many as you hope. You create a YouTube video hoping it's going to go viral, and it doesn't. You write an ad thinking, okay, this is going to change everything, and people don't like it. You send a manuscript to a publisher and you get 20 rejections, or you go on a first date and you think, well, no, maybe not. Most things that we try are not going to be quite as spectacular as we'd hope they will be. Sometimes we're surprised, but my experience is that most things are not the successes that we hope they might be. But when we keep up our work rate, when we continue to just keep giving our best one day after another, all of those things that mostly weren't as wonderful as we'd hoped they would be add up to progress. And um, that is how we get there, by putting a lot of things together which might have been fairly average or even less than average, but collectively we make the progress. The other thing that, as you were talking about Arnie and his career, the extraordinary thing about him, if we go back to what we hold in our mind, is as a 15-year-old, he saw himself as a bodybuilding champion. He saw
Yeah,
himself as a movie star, and he saw himself as an American.
I know.
uh, and
Remarkable.
and he's such an advocate of um, visualization and the mental picture that we keep for ourselves. And Brett, let me touch on one thing uh, that we've kind of touched on briefly, is this idea of thinking about what you want. A lot of people perhaps live their life saying, well, I don't want this or I don't want that. And our mind cannot work on the reverse of an idea. So if we've spent our whole life saying, I don't want to be broke or I don't want to be fat, or if we say, for example, I want to go and give this presentation and I don't want to screw it up, your mind doesn't understand the reverse of an idea. Your mind is like the GPS in your phone. If you say to yourself, okay, you want to go to the supermarket, and so you type in your phone, not the airport, and you say, well, that would make no sense. And of course, it wouldn't work, but it's the same for our mind. If you tell yourself what you don't want, it's not helpful. Your mind can't do it. So we always need a picture of what it is that we want. Not, I don't want to drop this ball, but I want to catch this ball. I want to deliver this presentation with confidence. I want to flourish. I see myself as thriving.
And I think it's a good point, and I think just in general, um, uh, not only have a lot of studies confirmed all those ideas, but I think just in general, it also skews you toward thinking more positively about things anyway, if that's the way you train your mind to think and frame things as though you're focused on what you want instead of what you don't want. And that's sort of what I was talking about when, earlier when I said, you'll talk to people and you can recognize right away from their patterns of speech, the way that they think, that they are skewed toward the negative because everything that comes out of their mouth is about what they don't want, what they're afraid of, what they did, the problems that they've got. And, it is amazing because I don't think it's a coincidence that the happiest people tend to be the ones that always seem to be the most it's like a circle and it just goes around. If you're already expecting good things to happen, in general good things happen. When you're expecting bad things to happen, in general bad things happen, or at least that's the way you view them. And so it's super powerful, and it's disarmingly simple in some ways and yet really profound. And that's what always fascinates me about it. So all right, where can people find you, your products, your services, connect with you?
Okay, I have a website. I do a newsletter which consists of a cartoon and about 100 words maximum, sometimes less. So my website is andrewmatthews.com. That is all one word with two T's in the Matthews. Um, all of my books are on Amazon. So my first book, Being Happy, which is like an introduction to the ideas that we've been talking about today. My book, Follow Your Heart, which is really a book about career and finding purpose in your life and work. My latest book, Bouncing Back, which is about resilience. And I share with you listeners that when I began writing books, I wanted books that would be accessible, that felt a little bit more like a magazine. In other words, there's a little bit of white space. There are headings so you can see what you're getting into, so you can skip the bits that you don't want to read at the moment, come back to those, and lots of cartoons that would make it fun and entertaining. And I write books that anyone can understand. My approach to writing books is if a 12-year-old can't understand any sentence of mine, it's my fault, and I need to fix it because nobody wants to read a sentence 4 times to say, what does this guy mean? So they will be simple. They do get to the point. Hopefully, you'll find them humorous. And they're all on Amazon um, in hard copy and also as ebooks. And Follow Your Heart and Bouncing Back, I've also done the audio. So if you like audible books with an Australian flavour, they're done by me.
That's awesome. Thanks a lot. Thanks for sharing that. All right, with that, it's just about time to wrap things up. I want to thank you again, Andrew, so much for sharing all your insights and great tips with us. Visit andrewmatthews.com to get his newsletter with happiness tips and his cartoons. Thanks for tuning in. As always, remember, no matter what you want for your business and your life, don't compromise, optimize.